Sarah Johnson had pulled her car into the parking lot of Atlanta General Hospital, move mountains, just like she had done every morning for the past 3 years. Come wrapped in the most unexpected early morning sun was just beginning to peek through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the building where she worked as a nurse. She grabbed her coffee cup from the cup holder and took one last sip before heading inside. Today felt like any other Tuesday, but life had a funny way of surprising people when they least expected it. As she walked through the automatic doors, several of her coworkers greeted her with friendly waves and smiles. Sarah was well liked in the hospital, known for her gentle touch with patients and her ability to make anyone feel comfortable. At 32 years old, she had built a good life for herself, even though her mother constantly reminded her that she wasn't getting any younger and needed to find a husband. "Sarah, could you help out in the rehabilitation ward today?" Linda, the head nurse, called out as Sarah was putting her things in her locker. "We're short-staffed, and there's a new patient who needs extra attention." Of course, Sarah replied with a smile. She hadn't worked in rehab for a while, but she enjoyed helping patients recover and rebuild their strength. After checking her assignments for the day, she headed to the 3rd floor. The rehabilitation ward was quieter than the emergency room where she usually worked. As she walked down the hallway, she could hear the gentle whirring of exercise equipment and the encouraging voices of physical therapists working with their patients. She stopped at the nurse's station to pick up her patient files. "Your first patient is in room 312, the ward secretary told her. "Marcus Thompson, admitted 3 weeks ago. He's recovering from a spinal injury after a car accident." Sarah nodded and walked to room 312, reviewing the file as she went. Marcus had been a high school basketball coach before the accident that left him unable to walk. As she approached his room, she could hear someone talking on the phone. "No, Mom, I don't need you to fly out here," a deep voice said. "I'm doing fine. The therapists say I'm making good progress." There was a pause. "Yes, I know it's hard, but I'm not giving up. I'll call you tomorrow." Sarah knocked on the doorframe and stepped into the room. The sight that greeted her made her pause for a moment. Marcus Thompson was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, the morning sunlight highlighting his strong features. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with warm brown eyes and a clean-shaven head. Despite being confined to the wheelchair, he sat with a natural dignity that caught her attention. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, walking into the room. "I'm Sarah Johnson, and I'll be your nurse today." Marcus turned his wheelchair to face her, and his face lit up with a smile that seemed to brighten the whole room. "Please call me Marcus," he said. "Mr. Thompson makes me feel like I'm back in my classroom dealing with troubled students." Sarah couldn't help but smile back. There was something about his voice and manner that put her at ease immediately. As she checked his vital signs and reviewed his medication chart, they fell into easy conversation. "So, you are a teacher and coach?" Sarah asked as she measured his blood pressure. "Still am," Marcus corrected her gently. "Just taking an unexpected break. The accident might have changed how I move, but it hasn't changed who I am." His positive attitude surprised her. Many patients in his situation struggled with depression and anger, but Marcus spoke about his condition with remarkable acceptance and even humor. "My students visit sometimes," he continued. "They keep me updated about the basketball team and bring me their homework to grade. Can't let a little thing like being in the hospital stop me from giving pop quizzes." Sarah laughed, and for the next hour, as she helped him with his morning routine and prepared him for his physical therapy session, they talked about everything from their favorite books to their dreams for the future. Marcus told her about his plans to return to teaching, adapting his coaching style to work from his wheelchair. His determination was inspiring. As she helped him into his therapy chair, Sarah found herself looking forward to seeing him again during her shift. There was something special about Marcus Thompson, a quiet strength that went beyond physical abilities. When their hands touched briefly during the transfer, she felt a small flutter in her stomach that she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you, Sarah," Marcus said as she prepared to leave for her next patient. "You know, this is the first morning since the accident that I haven't thought about what I can't do. Instead, I've been thinking about what I can do." Sarah smiled, touched by his words. "I'll see you this afternoon." "Marcus," she said, and as she walked out of the room, she realized that this ordinary Tuesday had turned into something extraordinary. Sometimes, she thought, the best things in life come when you're not looking for them at all. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to her shifts in the rehabilitation ward more than ever before. She had requested to continue working with Marcus and Linda, noticing the positive effect Sarah had on his recovery, happily agreed. What started as routine care slowly turned into something more meaningful. During his physical therapy sessions, Sarah would often stay past her assigned time to encourage Marcus. She watched as he pushed himself through grueling exercises, his determination never wavering even when his body was exhausted. His physical therapist, Mike, noticed how Marcus seemed to work harder when Sarah was around. "You're different with her," Mike said one day after a particularly challenging session. Marcus had just finished his upper body strengthening exercises, his t-shirt damp with sweat. Marcus smiled, watching Sarah chat with another patient across the room. "She doesn't see the wheelchair first," he said simply. "She sees me." But not everyone shared their growing connection. One morning, Sarah was organizing medicines at the nurse's station when she overheard two of her colleagues whispering. "Did you see how she looks at him?" One nurse said. "I mean, he seems nice, but he's in a wheelchair. What kind of future could they have?" "Maybe she feels sorry for him," the other replied. "You know how Sarah is, always trying to help everyone." Sarah's hands trembled as she closed the medicine cabinet. Their words hurt, but they also made her angry. They didn't know Marcus like she did. They hadn't seen him tutoring his students from his hospital bed, or heard him talk about his plans to coach basketball from his wheelchair. They didn't know about his quick wit, his kind heart, or the way he could make her laugh even on her hardest days. Marcus faced his own challenges too. One afternoon, his best friend David visited him at the hospital. Sarah was helping Marcus back to his room after therapy when she heard their conversation. "Man, I'm worried about you," David said, his voice filled with concern. "First the accident, and now I hear you're getting close to your nurse. You need to think clearly about this." "I am thinking clearly," Marcus replied firmly. "For the first time since the accident, I feel like myself again. Sarah doesn't treat me like I'm broken." "But she's—" David hesitated. "She's what?" Marcus challenged. "Black? Is that what you're trying to say?" "No, that's not. I just want you to be careful. Your life is complicated enough right now." Sarah quietly stepped away from the door, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger. She understood that people might not understand their connection, but she knew what she felt was real. Later that evening, as Sarah was finishing her shift, she found Marcus in the hospital garden. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face as he sat in his wheelchair, looking thoughtful. "Rough day?" she asked, sitting on a bench beside him. Marcus turned to her with a slight smile. "David means well," he said. "He's just worried." "My friends are worried too," Sarah admitted. "They think I'm not being realistic." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. "What do you think?" he asked softly. Sarah looked at their intertwined fingers, her dark skin against his lighter tone, both equally strong, equally human. "I think people see what they want to see," she said. "They see a black woman and a white man in a wheelchair. But I see Marcus Thompson, the man who makes me laugh, who inspires his students, who never gives up." "And I see Sarah Johnson," Marcus replied, his voice growing stronger. "The woman who saw past everything else to who I really am. The woman who makes me feel whole again." In that moment, sitting in the quiet hospital garden, they both knew they had found something special. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. They would face more prejudice, more doubt, more challenges. But they had already broken through the biggest barriers, the ones in their own hearts. As the sun set behind the hospital buildings, Sarah and Marcus stayed in the garden, talking about their hopes and dreams. They talked about his plans to return to teaching, about her career goals, about all the possibilities that lay ahead. Their different backgrounds and his disability weren't barriers to their connection. They were just parts of their unique story. "My mom always said that love doesn't follow rules," Sarah said, smiling as the first stars appeared in the sky. "I guess she was right." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Then let's make our own rules," he said, and in his voice was all the promise of tomorrow. 3 months had passed since Marcus first arrived at Atlanta General Hospital, and everything had changed. The doctors were amazed by his progress in physical therapy, but everyone knew it wasn't just the exercises making him stronger. Love had a way of healing that medicine couldn't explain. One bright Monday morning, Sarah arrived at work to find Marcus already in the therapy room, working with Mike on his upper body exercises. She paused in the doorway, watching him lift weights with focused determination. His arms had grown stronger, and his smile was brighter than ever. "You're early today," Sarah said, walking into the room. Marcus put down the weights and turned his wheelchair to face her. "Had to get ready for the big day," he replied with a grin. "My students are coming to watch me teach my first online class from the hospital." The hospital had worked with Marcus's school to set up a special teaching area in one of the conference rooms. They had installed cameras and computers so he could continue teaching his history classes. Sarah had helped him prepare for days, listening to him practice his lessons and helping him organize his digital materials. At exactly 9 a.m., the conference room was ready. Marcus sat confidently in front of the computer screen, wearing a neat button-down shirt and his favorite tie. Sarah stood in the corner, watching as 20 eager faces appeared on the screen, his students excited to see their teacher back in action. "Good morning, class," Marcus began, his voice strong and clear. "Today's lesson is about overcoming challenges in history. I think I know a thing or two about that now." The students laughed, and just like that, Marcus was teaching again. He led discussions about historical figures who had faced enormous obstacles, relating their stories to modern-day challenges. Sarah watched in amazement as he commanded the virtual classroom with the same skill he must have shown on his feet. During the lunch break between classes, Sarah brought them both sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. "You are amazing," she said, sitting beside him. "It feels good to be teaching again," Marcus replied, taking her hand. "But I couldn't have done it without you. You make me believe anything is possible." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. To their surprise, it was Marcus's mother, Gloria, who had flown in from Chicago without telling him. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable as she looked at their joined hands. "Mom?" Marcus said, quickly recovering from his surprise. "What are you doing here?" Gloria Thompson walked into the room slowly, her eyes moving from Marcus to Sarah and back again. "David called me," she said. "He was concerned about some of your choices." Sarah started to pull her hand away, but Marcus held on tighter. "Mom," he said firmly, "this is Sarah Johnson. She's not just my nurse. She's the woman I love." The room fell silent. It was the first time either of them had used the word love out loud. Gloria Thompson sat down heavily in a nearby chair, her handbag clutched tightly in her lap. "Marcus," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "when you had your accident, I thought I'd lost my son. I was so scared. And now," she paused, looking at Sarah more carefully. "Now I see you teaching again, smiling again. You look happier than you've been since before the accident." Tears began to form in Gloria's eyes. "I came here ready to talk some sense into you. But watching you teach today, seeing how you look at each other." She stood up and walked over to Sarah, taking her free hand. "Thank you for giving me my son back." Sarah felt tears in her own eyes as Gloria pulled her into a tight hug. Over her shoulder, she could see Marcus watching them, his eyes shining with emotion. The afternoon classes went even better than the morning ones. Word had spread through the hospital about the teacher in the wheelchair who was changing lives from his hospital room. Other patients started dropping by to watch him teach, drawing inspiration from his determination. At the end of the day, as Sarah helped Marcus back to his room, he stopped his wheelchair in front of the window where they had first met. The setting sun painted the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink. "I used to think the accident took everything from me," Marcus said softly. "But it led me to you. Sometimes the best gifts come in unexpected packages." Sarah leaned down and kissed him gently. In that moment, they weren't a black woman and a disabled man. They were just two people in love, proving to the world that the heart knows no boundaries. 6 months after their first meeting, Marcus knew it was time. He had been planning this moment for weeks, working secretly with Mike, his physical therapist, and Linda, the head nurse, to make everything perfect. The hospital garden, where he and Sarah had shared so many special moments, would be the perfect place to ask the most important question of his life. The garden looked different today. Linda and the other nurses had helped decorate it with white fairy lights and flowers. They had strung them carefully through the trees and around the benches, making the ordinary hospital garden look magical. Marcus checked his pocket for the 10th time, making sure the small velvet box was still there. Everything's ready, Mike said, adjusting Marcus's tie. Are you sure you want to try this? Marcus nodded firmly. I've been practicing for weeks. I can do this. Sarah was working her usual evening shift, unaware of what was waiting for her. Linda had made sure to keep her busy with paperwork until everything was set up. At exactly 7 p.m., just as the sun was starting to set, Linda called Sarah to the nurse's station. Sarah, could you check on something in the garden? Linda asked, trying to hide her smile. One of the patients said they saw someone out there. Sarah looked confused but headed toward the garden. As she opened the glass doors, she stopped in surprise. The garden was transformed, twinkling with hundreds of tiny lights. In the center, Marcus waited in his wheelchair, wearing a dark blue suit and the biggest smile she had ever seen. Marcus, Sarah said softly, walking toward him. What's all this? Sarah Johnson, Marcus began, his voice strong and clear despite his nervousness. The day you walked into my hospital room was the day my life truly began to heal. You didn't see a man in a wheelchair, you saw me. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. Tears began to form in her eyes as Marcus continued speaking. These past 6 months have taught me that love doesn't care about what you can or can't do. It doesn't care about the color of your skin or whether you can walk. Love only cares about what's in your heart. Then, to Sarah's complete amazement, Marcus began to move. Using all the strength he had built up through months of secret extra therapy sessions, he gripped the arms of his wheelchair tightly. Slowly, carefully, he pushed himself up to stand. He wasn't fully upright, and his legs trembled with the effort, but he was standing. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Behind her, she could hear gasps from the hospital staff who had gathered to watch through the garden windows. Marcus reached into his pocket with shaking hands and pulled out the small velvet box. His legs were trembling badly now, but he held his position. Mike stood nearby, ready to help if needed, but this was something Marcus had to do himself. I may not be able to get down on one knee, Marcus said, his voice filled with emotion, but I can stand up for my love for you. Sarah Johnson, will you marry me? Sarah rushed forward just as Marcus's strength began to give out. She helped him back into his wheelchair, then threw her arms around his neck, sobbing with joy. Yes, she cried. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Marcus's hands shook as he opened the box and slipped the ring onto her finger, a beautiful silver band with a small diamond that he had chosen with help from his mother. The gathered hospital staff burst into applause and cheers, many of them wiping away tears of their own. I've been practicing standing for weeks, Marcus explained as Sarah admired her ring. I wanted to show you that I'll always rise to any challenge for you. You didn't have to do that, Sarah said, kissing him softly. I would have said yes if you had asked me while doing a handstand. They both laughed, and Marcus pulled her close for another kiss. The garden lights twinkled around them like stars, celebrating their moment. Through the windows, their friends on the hospital staff were crying and hugging each other, overjoyed to witness such a beautiful moment. Later that night, as they sat together in the garden, Sarah couldn't stop looking at her ring. You know this means you're stuck with me forever now, she teased. Marcus took her hand and kissed it gently. Forever doesn't seem long enough, he replied, but it's a good start. Above them, the real stars had come out to join the fairy lights in celebrating their love. In that moment, everything was perfect. They had shown the world that true love knows no boundaries, no limitations, and no obstacles it cannot overcome. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and beautiful. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room, hardly believing this day had finally arrived. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, a flowing white gown that she had chosen because it would be perfect for dancing with Marcus, whether he was in his chair or attempting to stand. You look like an angel, Sarah's mother said, adjusting the veil in her daughter's curly black hair. Her mother's eyes were already wet with tears, though the ceremony wouldn't start for another 2 hours. It had taken time, but she had come to love Marcus like a son. I'm so nervous, Mama, Sarah whispered, smoothing down her dress for the 100th time. Not about marrying Marcus, she added quickly. Just about everything being perfect. Baby girl, her mother said, turning Sarah to face her, when you love someone the way you love Marcus, everything is already perfect. Across town, in another hotel room, Marcus was getting ready with help from his best man, David. Their friendship had grown stronger after David saw how happy Sarah made Marcus, and now he was Marcus's biggest supporter. "How are the legs feeling today?" David asked, helping Marcus with his bow tie. "Strong," Marcus replied with a confident smile. He had been practicing standing for longer periods, determined to share at least one standing dance with his bride. "Today, nothing can stop me." The ceremony was being held in the hospital garden where Marcus had proposed. It seemed right to have their wedding in the place where their love had grown. The hospital staff had outdone themselves decorating. White chairs lined a path through the garden, with an arch of flowers at the end. Marcus's students had helped too, creating handmade decorations that made the space feel magical. As the guests arrived, they represented the beautiful blend of two families coming together. Marcus's relatives from Chicago sat next to Sarah's large extended family from Atlanta. Hospital staff, who had watched their love story unfold, filled several rows. Marcus's students occupied an entire section, all wearing their basketball team jerseys over their dress clothes at his request. Marcus waited at the altar in his wheelchair, looking handsome in his black tuxedo. He had decided to use the chair for the ceremony, saving his strength for a special surprise during their first dance. His heart nearly stopped when the music began and Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle. Sarah walked slowly toward him, arm in arm with her father. She couldn't stop smiling as she saw Marcus waiting for her, his eyes filled with tears of joy. The sunlight caught her dress, making her glow like an angel. Everyone in the garden could feel the love radiating between them. When Sarah reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Marcus's. "Take care of my baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "With everything I am," Marcus promised. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. They had written their own vows, speaking from their hearts about their journey together. Marcus spoke about how Sarah had taught him that love sees no barriers, only possibilities. Sarah talked about how Marcus had shown her what true strength really means. "Love isn't about what you can or cannot do," Sarah said in her vows, her voice carrying clearly through the garden. "It's about who you are, and Marcus Thompson, you are the strongest, kindest, most amazing man I've ever known." When it came time for the rings, one of Marcus's youngest students brought them forward on a small basketball-shaped pillow, making everyone laugh. As they exchanged rings, their hands were steady, sure in their commitment to each other. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss the bride." Sarah leaned down slightly as Marcus reached up, their lips meeting in a kiss that made their guests burst into applause and cheers. Marcus's students started chanting, "Coach, Coach, Coach," while the hospital staff wiped away happy tears. As they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson for the first time, confetti rained down on them, white and silver pieces catching the sunlight like falling stars. Marcus held Sarah's hand tightly, and she smiled down at him with pure joy. "Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Thompson?" Marcus asked, his eyes twinkling with the secret of his planned surprise for their first dance. Sarah squeezed his hand. "With you?" "Always," she replied, and her smile lit up the entire garden. The newlyweds led their wedding procession back down the aisle, their path showered with flower petals and love. They had proven that true love could overcome any obstacle, and their story was just beginning. Sarah stood beside Marcus at the Florida rest stop, the warm breeze playing with her hair as she waited to help him from his wheelchair into the van. But Marcus made no move to transfer. Instead, he looked up at her with eyes full of love and determination. "Remember when I proposed to you?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite his obvious excitement. "Remember how I managed to stand?" "Of course," Sarah replied softly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "That was one of the most beautiful moments of my life." Marcus took a deep breath. "Well, I never stopped working after that day. Every time you were on night shift, every moment I could spare, I was in therapy. But not just regular therapy." He paused, his eyes shining. "I found a specialist in experimental treatments, someone who believed I could do more than just stand." Sarah's heart began to race as she started to understand what he was saying. "Marcus," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I wanted to give you a wedding gift that would show you just how much your love has inspired me," Marcus continued. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair firmly. "Step back a little, honey." Sarah moved back slightly, her eyes wide with anticipation. Slowly, carefully, Marcus began to push himself up from his wheelchair. But this time was different from when he had proposed. This time, his movements were more controlled, more confident. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped as Marcus fully stood up, his legs trembling but holding steady. Tears began streaming down her face as she watched her husband stand straight and tall before her. But Marcus wasn't finished. With intense concentration, he lifted his right foot and took a small step forward. Then another, and another. "The specialist helped me regain partial feeling in my legs," Marcus explained as he slowly walked toward her, his voice shaking with emotion. "I won't be running any marathons, and I'll still need the chair sometimes, but..." He took another step. "I can walk to my wife when she needs me." Sarah couldn't speak through her tears of joy. She covered her mouth with her hands as Marcus took the final steps to reach her. When he got to her, he wrapped his arms around her, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "This is why you insisted on driving?" Sarah finally managed to ask, holding him tightly. Marcus nodded against her hair. "I wanted somewhere private, somewhere special for our first real dance as husband and wife." He pulled back slightly and took out his phone, pressing play on a song, their wedding song that they hadn't been able to dance to traditionally at their reception. There, in the empty parking lot of a Florida rest stop, Marcus and Sarah had their first dance. They swayed together slowly, Marcus's steps small but steady, Sarah supporting him when he needed it. The music drifted softly around them as the sun painted the sky in beautiful colors. "How long have you been planning this?" Sarah asked as they danced, still hardly believing what was happening. "Since the day you first told me you loved me," Marcus replied. "That's when I knew I had to try everything possible. The doctors said it was a long shot, that the nerve damage was severe. But they didn't know what your love gives me the strength to do." Sarah leaned her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You didn't have to do this for me. I would have loved you just the same." "I know," Marcus said softly. "That's exactly why I wanted to do it. Your love never asked me to change, never demanded I be anything other than who I am. That kind of love makes a man want to move mountains." As their song ended, Marcus led Sarah to a nearby bench. His legs were tired, but his smile was radiant. "I'll still need the chair most days," he explained. "The walking is limited, and I have to be careful not to overdo it. But I wanted to show you that with you by my side, anything is possible." Sarah kissed him tenderly. "You've already shown me that every single day since we met. This is just icing on the most beautiful cake." They sat together on the bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. What had started as a simple rest stop had become the site of another miracle in their love story. Marcus held Sarah close, thankful for the woman who had seen past his wheelchair to the man inside, who had loved him completely and inspired him to achieve the impossible. "Ready to continue our journey, Mrs. Thompson?" Marcus asked after a while, knowing his legs needed rest. "With you," Sarah smiled, helping him back to his wheelchair. "I'm ready for anything." 1 year after their memorable honeymoon journey, Sarah and Marcus Thompson sat in the garden of their new home. The same garden where Marcus now practiced walking each morning, taking small but steady steps while holding Sarah's hand. Their story had spread throughout their community, becoming a symbol of hope and determination for others. "Can you believe it's been a year already?" Sarah asked, watching the sunset from their porch swing. She was still working as a nurse at Atlanta General, but now in a new role heading up the rehabilitation department. Marcus smiled, his hand resting on her growing baby bump. They had just found out they were expecting twins, a boy and a girl. "Best year of my life," he replied, his eyes full of joy. "Though I think next year might be even better." Their house was specially designed to accommodate both Marcus's wheelchair and his improving mobility. Wide doorways, smooth floors, and carefully placed support bars allowed him to switch between walking and using his chair as needed. The students from his basketball team had even helped paint the nursery, decorating it with tiny basketballs and encouraging quotes. "Dr. Rivera called today," Sarah said, referring to the specialist who had helped Marcus with his groundbreaking treatment. "She wants to feature your recovery in a medical journal. She says your case could help other patients with similar injuries." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. If our story can give hope to even one person, it's worth sharing. He had already started a support group at the hospital, working with other patients who were facing similar challenges. His journey from patient to mentor had inspired many. The doorbell rang, interrupting their peaceful moment. It was Mike, Marcus's former physical therapist who had become a close friend, arriving for their weekly dinner gathering. He carried a large photo album under his arm. "Look what I found while cleaning the therapy room," Mike said, joining them on the porch. He opened the album to reveal photos of Marcus's first days in rehabilitation, including the day he met Sarah. As they flipped through the pages, their journey unfolded in pictures. There was Marcus teaching from his hospital room, Sarah helping him with therapy, the moment he proposed, their wedding day, and finally, a photo someone had captured at the Florida rest stop when he revealed he could walk. "I remember being so nervous that day," Marcus admitted, looking at the rest stop photo. "Not about walking, but about making sure the surprise was perfect for you." Sarah squeezed his hand. "It was perfect because it was you." Mike pointed to a recent photo of Marcus standing with his basketball team. "You know, the kids still talk about the day you walked into the gym on your own. I think half of them thought they were seeing a ghost." They all laughed, remembering the shocked faces of Marcus's students when he had surprised them by walking into practice one day. He still coached from his wheelchair most of the time, but being able to demonstrate certain moves while standing had added a new dimension to his teaching. "Oh!" Sarah suddenly exclaimed, placing Marcus's hand on her belly. "The babies are kicking again. They're going to be athletes like their daddy." Marcus's eyes filled with tears of joy as he felt his children move. "They're going to know that anything is possible," he said softly. "That love can overcome any obstacle." As the evening grew darker, their friends and family began arriving for their weekly dinner tradition. Gloria, Marcus's mother, brought her famous apple pie. Sarah's parents came with baby gifts and nursery decorations. Some of Marcus's students showed up too, carrying basketball equipment for the small court they were helping to build in the backyard. Their home filled with laughter, love, and the warmth of community. Marcus watched as Sarah moved through the crowd, her pregnancy giving her a special glow. She caught his eye and smiled, a smile that still made his heart skip a beat. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Marcus and Sarah stood together in the nursery. Marcus had walked there himself, holding onto the support bars they had installed along the hallway. They looked at the two cribs waiting for their babies, painted with messages of hope and love. "You know what I think?" Sarah said, leaning back against his chest as he stood steady behind her. "I think our story was never just about walking. It was about believing in love strong enough to make miracles happen." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "And our miracle is just beginning," he said, placing his hands on her belly again. "Our love story isn't just ours anymore. It belongs to them too." As they stood there in the soft light of the nursery, they knew their journey had only just begun. Their story had shown the world that love knows no boundaries, that faith can move mountains, and that sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped in the most unexpected packages.